Okay. I want to welcome Dave and Al, and I'll mention a little more about them once they get seated. Come on up. While they're on their way, I think this is live, isn't it? Okay. I'll resist song. I want to say that I think the mayor and county executive and congressman have covered a lot of what Traffic21 has done and accomplished, including the model Metro 21 following and the Metro Lab network. But I think it's really, really important while we're here today to figure out what ignited this whole thing. How did it start? So there's a gentleman to my right named Dave Roger, who is the president of the Hillman Family Foundations. There's more than one, by the way, but a critical one is named after our benefactor, and the funding that he gave Carnegie Mellon really ignited this. And I think we ought to ask Dave to start off by explaining how did this all happen and why did it all happen? And aren't you happy that it's 10 years later?
I'm happy that Rick Stafford returned my phone call when I called to pitch this idea to him. And I think the story's been told 100 times, so I'll try to make it very brief. But the back page of the Wall Street Journal 10 years ago, there was a section on science and technology highlighting the possibilities of the future for smart transportation technology. So my boss at the time, Henry Hillman, had it open in the conference room in his office. He said, what do you think about this technology, and could it work in Pittsburgh? I think if we could deploy this at scale, we could really distinguish the city and fix some transportation problems in the city. That's an interesting idea. You know, what do you want to do? And he said, well, I'm thinking let's maybe put a research program together, but I'd really like to see it implemented on the city streets and throughout the region. So I did what I do in situations like that. I called Rick Stafford. Unfortunately, Rick took the phone call, and I said, Rick, can I come over and talk to you about this idea that Henry had? And Rick said, great, you know, what's your schedule like in the next few weeks? And I said, Rick, I'm thinking maybe this afternoon. So fortunately, Rick did meet with me that afternoon, and that's really how this idea was hatched. But let me sum it up and put it this way. When it came to philanthropy, Henry had this principle in mind, and it was that Western Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh were the perfect size to try anything. We're just big enough to have big city issues, big geographic region issues, but we're small enough that we can do something about it. And there's a civic fabric here that steps up and takes on challenges and solves them. And that's really why this started. This has as much to do with Pittsburgh as it does about the technology and the kind of leadership we have in this region.
Yeah, and I should say that it happened just that way, and I tried to put David off, and he came out to Carnegie Mellon that Thursday afternoon, in fact, and explained Henry's idea. And my first reaction was, wait a second, I thought universities were supposed to ask you for money. What you're here is to ask this university to take your money. I thought that's pretty good, but on the other hand, I said, I know nothing about this technology. I didn't even have an appreciation of autonomous vehicles in any way, shape, or form at the time. And his reply was, don't worry about that. We'll send you down to the Intelligent Transportation Society of America. Jim Meisner knows, a familiar place. And I said, I didn't even know there was one. And I learned over the 3 days there that there was an incredible opportunity for not only the university, but for the community. So I came back and I told Dave, well, let's give this a try, maybe 1 year, and let's see where it goes. And he said, okay, well, Henry would like you to go out and reach out to people to find out what their problems are as a starting point. So that led me to call a certain friend of Pittsburgh, almost native of Pittsburgh, named Al Beeler, who's the second guy to my right. Al, at the time, was Secretary of Transportation for the state of Pennsylvania. So I called him up and I said, I won't repeat the exact words, but I said, I've gotten myself in some deep farm stuff. Would you meet with us? And David and I went up to see Al Beeler to explain what we were up to. Al, do you remember that?
Well, I had to go back and look at my calendar. In January 22nd of 2009, these guys show up on my doorstep. And I'd known Rick for only 25 years or so, but now he works for a university, and he says, "Now, we're not here looking for money." I said, "Right." And he wasn't. He said, "We're looking for problems, and oh, by the way, they're talking about this ITS stuff. I'm not sure I'm fully understanding what it really is," but as typical of Rick, and then as I met with Dave as well for the first time, these guys are pretty good at doing their homework. So they really had a pretty good idea what they're doing. So we talked about what was going on at Penn at the time and using technology with 511, and the Deputy Secretary of Highways, a fellow named Scott Christie, was there with us, and we talked about a series of things, including things like snowplow technology. What? Snowplow stuff? Well, for guys like Kirk Steidel who know what this is about, Kirk used to be the director of the DOT in Michigan. We all know that the business of plowing snow is pretty sophisticated stuff with incredible equipment that tells you all about the air temperature and the ground temperature and what kind of mixes you use. Well, I remember back a couple of years before Rick and I met, where there was a small snowstorm that was a little bit of a problem in Pennsylvania that just about took my head off. But I said, yeah, if we can do things that are using technology to better our world, let's do it. The interesting thing to me was that the push with CMU was all about finding people who have practical problems and wanting to do something about it. And that really resonated with me. And they said, well, we're going to go down to meet with the folks down in Washington, the Intelligent Transportation Society of America. And I said, hey, if it's okay, I'll tag along with you. And that began a good relationship with these guys, and then finally putting, starting toward some changes that ultimately led to the University Center. But,
yeah, and so one of the things Henry Hillman suggested at the time was, if we can pilot some of these ideas, many of which the mayor and Rich Fitzgerald, the county executive, have referenced, maybe we can build a case for a university transportation center. And in July of 2009, when in fact I was just starting, I met this guy named Dr. Raj Kumar. And he and I, along with, and I don't see Tim McNulty, but I see Debbie Takevika somewhere here, we started plotting to see if we could petition the federal government for a UTC. And that was when we recruited Al, actually, to join the faculty to be the first executive director of the very first UTC, and partnered with Penn. And Al, I guess my question for you would be, we have to go at a UTC again. In fact, it's going to be one of the secretaries that makes that decision. What should we be thinking about for the next UTC?
I'll just reiterate that when I finally did join CMU and work with these guys and with Raj and with Stan Caldwell and the whole group, it was really a labor of love. And folks were really doing things that were really interesting, trying to do things not only related to specific technology applications, but also policy applications. And that really made a sense to me. And lots of discussion that eventually turned into Metro 21 and talking about, well, it's not just transportation, but how does transportation affect other people's lives? What does it mean to the economy and so on? Mayor Peduto talked about, how does a traffic signal system make a difference, not just for people's transportation, but much beyond that. I think there's a lot to be thought about in that realm as you go forward. Specifically, there's a piece of work going on right now at Hines College being led by a professor, Lee Brandstetter, as an example, to look at a particular small group of people, namely low-income mothers with kids at home, and what does transportation access and transportation costs mean to their lives and their ability to get access to jobs and as well as other daily activities. So part of the thing I think that's important is to understand those kind of things better, understand more about our region and the people in the region, and what transportation do they have, what barriers are there, and then ultimately the question is, can you then apply data analytics? Can you apply automation? What things can make a difference in their lives? So I would say one of those things is to delve into that. I know, again, there's a lot of opportunities. Professor Sean Kyan is driving the Mobility Data Analytics Center here at CMU. A number of folks within both of the Hines and the Engineering College partnerships. It also strays into things like urban design issues, great urban design capabilities. Anyways, there's an awful lot of interdisciplinary opportunity, and so I would say that's one of the things. How does transportation, what do we know about transportation, what it means to people, opportunity, and what can you do to change it and expand the opportunities to a broad workforce?
Well, and in fact, Congressman Doyle pointed out that let's do the next 10 years. So I'm going to fire basically the same question at you, Dave. And of course, we've lost Henry, so you're going to have to extrapolate from that. But if he were alive, what would he be saying about where we should be worried for the next 10 years?
He would already be frustrated that we've talked so much about the past, because he hated to talk about history in the past. Everything with Henry was forward-looking, so I'll pivot more in the direction where Al was going. We've come so far in 10 years. It's really remarkable when you think about the types of projects that Traffic21 has been able to lead in the city and across the region. And the range of the types of technology, the commercialization opportunities, new companies form. So we've come very, very far. I can tell you in those very early conversations with Henry, no one could have anticipated that I would have driven to work this morning behind an Argo AI autonomous vehicle being tested on the streets of Pittsburgh. That idea might as well have seemed like science fiction at that time. So we've come very far. I think the question going forward is, where are we going? These technologies are extraordinarily powerful. They're not an if we're going to have this technology in the future. Now it's we have the technology. What will we do with it? How will we deploy it? And make sure that we're using it in ways that improve health and safety for people. One area that Al touched on that is a big concern for ours, and we're interested in more research in, and we're supporting research in, is the future of work in transportation. This is an industry that stands to be significantly impacted by these technologies in the future. And what does that mean for people? What does that mean for jobs? And what does that mean for inclusion and equity when it comes to these types of jobs? So that's something we're very interested in as we look forward. These technologies are not going to go away. They're going to continue to advance, and the acceleration and the pace of their adoption is going to increase, and that's what we're going to be looking at in the near future.
So I'm going to pretend that Dave and Al asked me the same question, and I would add this perspective. When we think of transportation, we tend to think of this range that Traffic21 really tried to embrace, of whether it's a pedestrian or a bicycle or a vehicle or a truck or freight, or, Rich, the airport, right? But we have this other thing called the information highway, that in fact, it became apparent to me over these 10 years that in fact a lot of what we anticipate transportation to be in the future is going to be highly dependent on whether we've improved the information highway and made it affordable and available to everybody. In other words, broadband for all, to put it in shorthand. So I think that's something that we really have to be focused on. And in fact, when you brought up Sean Chen and his work at the Mobility Analytics Center, he's about to undertake a project in my home county of Greene, which Rich visited recently and is familiar with. But there's no possibility for doing a lot autonomous applications, apps, and so on to a great extent in that land. So I would add that.
And just to add to that, Rick, I think it's one of the real strengths of Traffic21, Mobility 21, Metro 21, is that by deploying these technologies in Pittsburgh, we're in a position to write the policy for the future in these technologies. So I think we position this region in a really unique way because of the impact that these centers have had on this city and this region.
Yeah. Actually, I want to, since I raised autonomous vehicles, okay, I want to call to mind, and Al, get ready for this, but a little event that happened several years ago. I wish Congressman Doyle were still here because he knew Congressman Schuster, right? And from the beginning, Raj, who's just an incredible guy, but relatively modest, we kept from the early days, Raj, we got to get more attention. We got to get more attention to this incredible work you're doing, like starting Automatica and so on, right? So we kind of conspired, those of us from the real world, Al Beeler and myself and Tim McNulty and Debbie, and let's invite the congressman to an autonomous vehicle drive. And Al, do you remember the night before that event and the event itself?
Oh, yeah. Well, yes, I remember. That was it was in 2013, and again, I had some history at the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, and all of a sudden somebody said, "Have you got clearance to run a 33-mile autonomous vehicle trip from Cranberry to the airport, going down Route 219, Interstate 79, Interstate 376, onto the Southern Beltway into the airport? Have you got a permission from the local enforcement?"
This was the day before.
Yeah, we had plenty of
Right.
time.
This was the
Of
day
course we
before.
do.
So fortunately, my Rolodex still had a couple of numbers that I thought I could reach through. Long story short, we ended up talking to the state police commissioner, and also I checked with the PennDOT chief counsel, and the operative phrase was, as long as an operator is in control of the vehicle, you're okay, which meant as long as someone's sitting behind the steering wheel, even though if the car is quote-unquote driving itself, as long as you can take control, you're okay, which we said, oh, thank God. We're okay. I think we can do it. So anyway, off we go, and the trip really was a success, thanks to the incredible work that Raj and his team had done to prepare that trip and make sure that the route was planned and all the signals were able to talk to the vehicle, and the vehicle could see what the signal change colors were. And it was really a very successful trip. Bill Schuster was very impressed with the thing, and that led to Bill inviting Raj and his team to come to D.C. and replicate an autonomous trip that worked around the Capitol, and that really put not only CMU on the map, but also it gave people in Congress a number of, direct experience taking that kind of a ride, and that really helped to accelerate the whole discussion about autonomous vehicles.
Yeah, it's sort of, I would add that it put Pittsburgh and what was happening here on the world map, actually. It rapidly escalated the visibility of our university and our town in this particular area. Roughly like I like to recall Red Whitaker doing robotics in 3 Mile Island to clean it up, which really gave us a boost as a university and reputation in robotics back in the 80s. So it was very, very, very seminal, and I think, and I'll ask Dave to elaborate a bit on this as well, but one of the interesting things about that whole experience is public policy and anticipating the technology and what it may insist upon by responsive public policy. But I'm going to have to, I'm getting a please conclude. So actually, I think it's time to bring the secretary on so that she can comment on the public policy needs that we have in the future. Dave, sorry to cut you short. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.